Today is September the 1st, 2024. I have Amelia Dicks, who's with Wind River Built. They're the new manufacturing company that you've read about in the newspaper and seen on the news. It's going to be a great discussion. When you came in, I mentioned Amelia Earhart. You were named after her?
I was, yep. My dad wanted to name me Penelope, and my mom hated that name, and my dad was a recreational pilot. So she said, how about Amelia? And he took the bait, and so I'm named after her, but I really don't enjoy flying nearly as much. Very much like being on the ground. So.
You didn't go in the route of being a pilot or anything?
No, he was more of a hang glider. Like once he got out of the military, he spent a lot of time hang gliding until he didn't know what month it was, and it must have been a good time to just not have any idea what's going on in the world.
Yeah, that hang gliding, to me that would be more scary because I would think you don't have as much control, but maybe you do.
I think it's just more peaceful because you don't have the sound of the motor. And so it doesn't scare the birds away. They come up around you and you can ride the thermals together. And
well, it'd be hard to do the first time, wouldn't it?
Yeah, a lot of trust.
I mean, the first time would be tough.
Yeah. Jumping off a mountain.
Whenever you read a story in the newspaper or see something on television about somebody getting arrested, you naturally assume they're guilty. Unless the story's about you or someone you love, then you'll think differently. And you'll want a lawyer who will defend you. My name's Scott Canavis. If you or someone you love has been charged with a crime, call me. I'll return your phone calls, I'll work on your case, and I will defend you.
So are you from Chattanooga?
Not originally. So I'm originally from Georgia, and then I moved to Chattanooga in 2020 on a hope and a prayer, basically, and started looking for a home. I was going to buy a house. I started looking in February of 2020, and I was looking from out of state. And then something happened in March of 2020 where housing prices started going up and up and up because the interest rates dropped from COVID. And so for 6 months, I watched housing prices start to skyrocket. And it was to a point where if I didn't get a house, I was never going to be able to afford one. And I had a fantastic real estate agent who essentially called in a favor from a listing agent that she knew. And I was able to get a small 800 square foot home off market. And I'm so grateful for that because so many other people are trying to do that now and they don't have options and they can't afford it because it's only gotten worse. And they're in our inbox and they're coming to Wind River because we got our roots building tiny homes and they're just thinking affordability. We want something smaller, but we still want it to be nice. And so it's been really rewarding to have the opportunity to work for them and to give back to the people who need housing and know that we're building something that people need and that's high quality and that they can be proud of because there's really no one else really stepping up to do that.
What part of Florida or Georgia was you originally? How long did you live there in Georgia? When you first came, when you were from originally Georgia?
Yes, I went to my undergrad studies in Ohio, so I was in Georgia up until I went off to college. And
like
then
close to here in Georgia, North Georgia?
Yeah, North Georgia. I don't know if you know where Commerce is, but that's where my parents live.
Yeah.
It's kind of on 85.
I've been to Commerce.
Yeah, it's a cool place. They love it. North Georgia is beautiful. I think more and more
Commerce
people
is booming.
It is.
Or
More and more
was when
people
I
are
was-
figuring it out. It's a great place to live. But Tennessee too. I mean, the growth Chattanooga has seen, people moving to Tennessee for all sorts of reasons.
Do you think that people are migrating here, or I know they say that a lot of people are moving into this area, but they've always been moving into this area. I think maybe I'm not sure what it is, but I think maybe more people are just moving to this side of Chattanooga.
I think that Tennessee is attracting a lot of people who now have the ability to work more remotely. And so a lot of people are retiring, like COVID. A lot of people retired after COVID, but then a lot of people also had remote availability. And so they're looking for a place to live. Tennessee doesn't have state income tax, so that's very
That's a big
appealing
deal, yeah.
to a lot of people. Nashville is completely overgrown and expanding and unaffordable. And then Knoxville is kind of close behind. So I think that Chattanooga has really positioned itself and got a lot of attention in the press, wanting to be the first national park city and all the opportunity for outdoor living, which was another thing that skyrocketed after COVID. So I think that that's the draw. I think that it's real. Like the traffic, the people moving to Chattanooga is definitely on an upswing.
You know, the Indians all migrated to that area.
To Chattanooga?
Yeah, it's because of the river. That's been like a four-way stop for as long as we can remember.
Yeah.
Things don't change that much, do they?
Just slowly. Yeah.
You know, have you ever thought about on affordable housing? Have you ever done any studies on the average house size? My understanding is the average house size over time, or dwelling we'll call them, is 1,650 square feet. Is that what you've...
I've seen it even higher. And I think it depends on which report you look at, but I've seen it as high as 2,500 square feet.
On the average?
For new construction, single-family home starts.
I'm talking about since the beginning, since 1900s or something.
Oh, yeah.
Because houses got bigger.
There is an article that the New York Times published a couple years ago now, and it's to this day the best summary of how we got to where we are now, because COVID just exacerbated things that have been building for decades. And so the average household size has been decreasing. It used to be, the American nuclear family, and we have less and less of that, to where currently over half of America is living as one or two people in a household. So that's one bedroom. We're talking single people or couples with no kids. But then the average size of homes that we're building has gone up and up and up that same time. So you have this juxtaposition, this misalignment of what we're building not matching what people need. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But it's a real problem. So when COVID hit, it really just took off with the problems that we had already been creating and not addressing. For example, it used to be, if you define a starter home like they did in this article as 1,400 square feet or less, it used to be that made up a significant portion of new starts. It used to be like 30, 40%, maybe even more. And now it's less than 10%. So we're just not building small homes anymore. And when you don't have housing diversity, it creates a slew of societal problems. So right now we just see a lot of, high-rise apartment complexes and condos, or very large 2,500 square foot plus single-family homes. And there's nothing in the middle, which we call the missing middle. And that has some serious implications for us as a country.
I remember when I've been building my whole life, but when I was in my teens, I worked for my uncle, and we would build 1,008 square foot houses, 1,200 and 1,300 square foot houses. And as I got into the 90s, the biggest house I built was 11,000 square feet. And it just kept growing and growing and growing. And they'd have bonus rooms and full basements finished with room for a pool table. And it just got really, the 90s were they call it the decade of the excesses. Everything was big. You had the big gulp Coca-Colas, and the big candy bars. Even the crackers came in 4s instead of 3s. Everything was plus sizes. And that kept going till 2005 or 6. And then I think that some people started feeling the bad economy until it hit '08, and then fast forward to 2020, and they just can't afford it like they did. They don't even want it. They don't even want a big house.
Yeah, that's what we see is the people who come to us, the people that we build for, need small housing because it's what they can afford, but they also want something that's super high quality. And I think it's hard to convince municipalities, for example, that there's a need for that when you don't have case studies and validation that that is in high demand because it doesn't exist in the first place. You know, you don't have that data set because we've gotten in our own way a lot with zoning, for example. So yeah, we believe that there's a high demand for smaller homes, but that it's also been a conversation. We started off with tiny homes, and that gets looped into the discussion along with things like homelessness and veteran housing a lot. And small housing and off-site built housing in general gets looped in with affordable housing and all sorts of things like that, where you try and build something as cheaply as possible. But it's a full gamut there. And Wind River has positioned itself on the high end of what's possible with a small space design. So where you can have a luxury home that's 400 square feet, or with modular, we can build a little bit bigger than that now, but tiny homes on wheels are no more than 400 square feet. And I think it's also difficult for the public to realize the demand for something when it's being prohibited so widely. For example, I had a news reporter from Nashville call me one day, it's like a year and a half ago, and he said, "You guys are in Tennessee, you build tiny homes. My boss wants me to do a story about someone living in a tiny home in Nashville." And I tried to be polite, but I kind of laughed in his face. I'm like, you're not gonna find this person that you're looking for. And he said, "Well, my boss wants me to write the story. It's due tomorrow, so I'm just going to keep calling." I said, "You're not going to find them because tiny homes on wheels are not allowed in Davidson County. They're not allowed in Hamilton County or Knox County. Most urban areas, because it doesn't have its own really strict building category yet to where you can have zoning that allows for it, and we advocate for that. But I said, you're not going to find this person, and if you do, they're not going to want to talk to you because they're living illegally. So call me back when you want to talk about the real story here, which is that we have alternative housing options, but they're not allowed in a lot of places because of zoning. And you would see tiny homes on wheels, for example, in every urban area if things were different. So people think that tiny homes are still a fad, but the reality is that it's a growing industry, and it would grow a lot more if we would get out of our own way and allow people to decide for themselves how they want to live, instead of continuing to build big houses and apartment complexes and things like that. So,
well, think about this. If you build a 3,000 square foot house now, you know, you're $200 a foot plus. And so that's 600, 800,000. Say it's 600. Well, the payment on that, on a 30-year mortgage at 8% interest or 7, whatever it is now, I guess it'd be what, $4,500 a month or something?
yeah.
Plus taxes and insurance, plus the upkeep of the bigger house.
Right.
Now, in order to pay that, you know, theoretically, you're supposed to make 4 times that.
Right.
So now you've got to be making $17,000 a month. Now, who's going to pay you $17,000 a month?
Right.
Because they've got to make 20 off of you. So I'm not sure that, and back in the years ago, that was the sign of success. I've got a big house, and I got a swimming pool, and I got a theater room. I remember I put in a bunch of theater rooms, which is just wiring and a TV, but they wanted to be fancy, and they call it a theater room. So it's not necessarily that people can't afford it. It's becoming preferred because you can either spend $4,000 a month on your housing, or you can spend $2,000 or $1,500 and go to France
Exactly.
for a week.
Yeah. There's been a huge shift, I think, with the younger generations moving away from materialism and more about experiences.
Absolutely. They want to take some good pictures,
Yeah.
create some memories, go on a hike.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in the 90s and the 80s, it was more about,
keeping up with the Joneses.
yeah, and be successful, and the button-down collars. And who's that guy on TV that I always remember? He's got that disease now. What was his name? What was
What
that
did he
guy's
do?
name, Gwen? Michael J. Fox. Do you remember that sitcom he was on?
I remember Back to the Future. What
Well,
was
this was a sitcom
I don't
before. It was
remember.
in the 90s, and that was what the 90s were about.
Yeah.
He was going to be in business, etc. But now, this new generation, they don't want to. They don't want to do all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If you gave them a house and told them they had to mow the yard, they'd probably just say, "I'll keep the house. I don't want to have to mow the yard."
Yeah.
So it's becoming a different mindset as to what living is.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going to stay in the business of building and selling real estate to people in residences, we better get a clue on what they can afford and what they want, and almost not even talk about what they can afford.
Mm-hmm.
It's what they want. Because some people would pay you more to have a small house. They don't want the headaches.
Yeah. I think it comes back to a conversation about incentivizing developers to build the right thing, because the most profitable projects for them are going to continue to be these very large homes and these apartment complexes, and you can't fault them for that. So somehow we have to incentivize developers to build smaller housing. We have to make it pencil. It's really difficult for developments of small homes to be profitable sometimes. You gotta get
I
creative.
think the math is the same. I really do. I think the bigger houses, you get more. I think the profit margin is the same.
I think there's a question about permit costs, right? The permit to put in a septic tank is the same regardless of how big of a house you're building.
Well, there are some things like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
and
the
then-
kitchen would be the same in a 1,000 square foot house as it was a 2,000 square foot house, and probably the wiring cost is not much different.
Yeah,
But there is some difference.
yeah.
And when you add up all the sums, it becomes a lot.
I think something that we're always educating people on is that when you build smaller, your price per square foot usually goes up.
Sure, yeah.
And the total home itself is still going to be cheaper than building a large home, but your price per square foot gets high. And the reason for that being is you're minimizing the amount of open space that you have, which is the cheaper square footage. Things like bedrooms, living rooms, all of that.
Hallways or stairways.
So all of that gets compressed, but you still have all the systems of a home. You still have your expensive square footage, which is your kitchen and your bathrooms. And so you have to absorb that and your permitting and infrastructure costs across a smaller footprint. And that results in a higher price per square footage. That's been the number one thing that when we talk to real estate agents about modular homes,
Yeah.
they're always talking about price per square foot.
They got to get off that.
Yeah,
That's
it's-
just going to confuse everybody.
It's not apples to apples.
No. Theoretically, my uncle used to tell me, if you build a house big enough, it's free.
Yeah. How does that
And
work?
Well, you just keep going so big that you get the economies of scale to where it's a penny a foot.
Right. Yeah.
But you build small, and it could be enormous per foot. So you can't think about that.
Right.
You got to look at the overall, the total cost. But I'm telling you, a lot of people do not want big anymore. it's just becoming not fashionable. And I know people would think I'm crazy, but I'm not. I know I've talked to people, and they're just wanting smaller stuff. Even the Cokes are getting smaller. The moon pies are smaller. Everything's going smaller and less hassle, less chaos, less maintenance.
Yeah, so I bought my first home in Chattanooga in 2020, moved here, I'm driving around, I'm looking at all the billboards, and I'm thinking to myself, 75% of these billboards are about things I can spend for my house. It's like furniture and lawn care and pest control and all of this. So I'm like, oh my gosh, literally everyone is creating a business around putting money into your house. And so if you have a smaller footprint, you can mitigate those costs and you can spend it on your trip to Europe or your motorcycle or whatever.
Or not work at a job you don't like.
Right.
Some people don't want that either.
I remember this commercial when I was growing up, back when we had commercials that you couldn't fast forward through. That was this guy walking around in his yard. He was on his lawnmower and he was talking about all of his assets.
Yeah.
He says, "How can I afford this?"
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Yeah, he said, I'm up to my eyeballs in debt or something like that.
I'm in debt up to my eyeballs.
Yeah.
And people don't want to live like that anymore, because I mean, with the interest rates right now for buying a house, you spend more in interest over the life of that loan than you spend on your house. And that doesn't sit well with a lot of people.
They don't want it anymore.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily, I'm sure some of it's economics, but it's not all economics. And in order to sell people these houses, they're not going to come up to what we want to make and the profit we want to make. We've got to come down to what they'll afford. They're not going to come up. So that's just any type of competition, I guess, or free enterprise. We've got to come down to what they will afford. What's your thoughts on what the average person will spend on a monthly payment?
Well, when we talk about affordability, that's usually defined as 30% of your monthly income should go to housing.
See, I've always been told it was 25. See, they're stretching it already.
Yeah, they're moving up a little bit.
So what would that be?
I think the AMI in Chattanooga is somewhere around the 50s or 60s.
With a combined joint income?
Yeah.
See, one thing about that it may be wrong too is people don't have joint incomes no more. Like you said, single mother, single father. I mean,
Single
just like everything getting smaller, they're really not going to get married and have 4 kids or 3. It's more like 1, and we're going to stay married for 5 years, and then I'm going to raise them the rest of the way. That's just the reality.
Yeah.
So a 2-bedroom house, a 3-bedroom house may become not necessary.
I think we have enough of those. And I talk sometimes about the moving chains of housing, and that we have affordable housing stock in Chattanooga, but the people who own those homes or rent those homes, they're not moving because no one wants to go back into the housing market right now, but there's also no next attainable rung for them. Everything is such a big jump. So our moving chains, and I don't have any data on this, but I feel like it's so stagnant. I'm one of these people. I live in a very small home. I'm not moving, but I could probably move up incrementally, but there's nothing there. So for someone who really needs affordable housing, the current stock is not freeing up on a regular basis. People aren't able to get that upward mobility and move up in housing. So we need affordable housing, yes. We also need housing diversity so that we can activate those moving change, and that's going to help. So for every market rate home that you put on the MLS, someone's going to move up ideally. Now, those chains can be broken if someone, say, from California or out of state moves in and buys that house, then you don't have a moving chain. But it all comes down to diversity, and we do not have that anymore. And
a lot of the subdivisions, the developments that were built the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the subdivision will restrict the houses to 1,600 square feet or 2,000 square feet. And I'm afraid that in the future, that's going to become a negative to have restrictions that you have to have so many square feet, because who are you going to sell it to?
Yeah, it's already, so that's a huge problem. And there are active lawsuits against municipalities that try and enforce minimum square footage requirements.
So some municipalities will do it?
Yeah, like Calhoun, Georgia, for example, has a lawsuit right now because they are blocking a site-built tiny home development. We're talking about 650 square foot homes. And this has been going on for probably 3 years now, dragging their feet, because the neighbors don't want it. They think it's going to attract riffraff. So they're citing this minimum square footage requirement as the reason for blocking this development. But constitutionally, you cannot tell someone how big their house should be. Every zoning ordinance has to be in the name of health and safety. And there's nothing less safe about a small home, and there's certainly nothing less healthy. So we see these popping up because, you know, city councils sometimes don't know what they should be doing, and then we're seeing them get struck down. So we're really fortunate in Chattanooga that we don't have that.
And why do people assume that somebody that wants to live in a small house is riffraff? That makes my blood boil. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
They just have a preferred living.
Yeah. I think there's a rate of perception change with anything. And the tiny home industry and you know, the interest in people living in small homes has advanced so much in recent years, and people's perception of what that means hasn't changed at the same rate. So they still associate it with some very stigmatized things. But the reality of the situation anymore is, you know, someone personally who is struggling to afford housing. This isn't something off in a corner. Like, this is a crisis in the country. And so how bold of someone to step up and say that you want to control how big your neighbor's house should be at a time like this.
Yeah, that's discriminatory if you ask me, especially for a municipality. I mean, if you want to develop your own subdivision and put restrictions on it, more power to you. But for the government to zone specific sizes, I can't agree with that. Doesn't Elon Musk live in one of them?
I think he invested in one of the tiny home companies. I can't remember which one.
It might have been Boxable.
Maybe.
I think he lives in one. I live in a small house. You know, not that large. And I just don't think it has anything to do with your finances or your character.
It's just how you want to spend your money.
It's just how you want to spend it. That's all it is.
And it's better for a community, for the members of that community, to have more expendable income, because they can go out and support the local businesses. So, you know, you might want your neighbors to have big houses because in your mind it's going to drive up your own property value. Or for the city, they're thinking, okay, bigger house, more property tax. But it's still beneficial for a community if you build small housing that's more affordable, and then people can go out and support all the businesses in town, and it just comes full circle.
But why are we even having to make an argument to the government about about why it's okay?
I think
I can drive a small car.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't restrict me against a small car.
I think it's more a conversation about there are a lot of government incentives out there, but there's not a lot of developers stepping up to the plate. Well,
I think that will eventually change. I really believe it is. Because people still have to have a place to park two cars. You're not going to eliminate that because that's a necessity. You know, back when the bad economy hit in 08 and 09, it really slowed. I guess are you too young for that?
I remember it a little bit, but not well enough.
Well, if you don't remember it, you weren't in it. Because it was bad. And I remember sitting at home and I thought, boy, this is getting bad. I mean, it was bad. Nobody was building nothing. And I thought about, well, everything's good with me. But I thought, what if I had to have a house? And so I sat down and I drew up a plan. This took me 3 or 4 weeks. What do you have to have? What do you have to have? You got to have a front door. And, those type things. You got to have 2 parking spaces. You have to have a washer and dryer. You know what it costs to wash a load of clothes at the laundromat?
$5?
$3. See, I thought it was 50 cents or something, 75. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I mean, you'd spend $15 doing clothes. Isn't that bizarre?
Yeah. There was a article that did a heat map study about people's homes and the space that they actually use, and they just put little dots where people spend time. And it was really heavily concentrated in like the kitchen and the bedroom, maybe the living area, but people are living their lives, and all the spare bedrooms is very sparse, and I think that they determined that the amount of space that you actually function in regularly in your house is a couple hundred square feet. But now if you look at the average household size and you look at the average size of a new home, we're building over 1,000 square feet per individual. And so because of that, you need double the amount of homes that you needed back in the 50s and 60s to house everyone, just because of the way that they're living.
Say that again. That's interesting.
So the average household size 50 years ago, somewhere around four people per household, maybe greater. I don't know, so I don't want to be misquoted or get it wrong, but it was high. And now it's just a little over 2. There's over half of America living alone or 2 people in a household. And the average size of a home is over 2,500 square feet. So right now, we're building over 1,000 square feet per person. Whereas back in the 50s and 60s, you had 4+ people living in an 800 square foot home. So you didn't need as many homes back then. So now you need twice as much supply to house the same number of people, but you have growing cities, so it just keeps perpetuating.
Well, it's interesting. How is yours different than I guess the old mobile home?
Sure. So mobile homes are built to HUD code, and they're on a chassis. They're built on a chassis, and they're mobile. If you wanted to move it again, you could. And the way cities and counties zone for that, like here in Chattanooga, there's a specific zoning district for mobile homes, and I think that's R5. Modular homes are basically, this is all the offsite terminology is very confusing at first. What people just need to know about modular is offsite construction of homes, of residential code homes. So the homes that we build are built to Tennessee State Residential Code or whatever state that they're headed to, which means you can put it in R1 here in Chattanooga because it's treated the exact same way as a site-built home. Mobile homes are not. They're their own thing. Mobile or modular homes are built to such a stringent certification and inspection process that they're oftentimes better built than site construction. And that's another thing is people have this stigma around offsite construction because we've seen really cheap, really poor examples of that. But there's another end of things with modular homes. They're having to withstand being lifted off and craned onto a foundation.
Well, don't you think that in the 40s, 30s and 40s, the carpenter would build the cabinets on the job. He would probably build the door. He would build the door jamb. He might build the window and get glass and glaze it. And he would put lathing on for the walls, and sheetrock was not existent then, it was plaster. So really having prefab windows and doors and prefab cabinets and sheetrock that is prefab. That is made off the job. They're just doing it now in one location, whereas, boy, the waste on new construction is bizarre. You need an 8-foot 2x4, and you need a 7-foot, and you get an 8-foot.
Right.
I assume that in your plant you have a use for that 1 foot.
Yeah.
Or maybe you order it from a manufacturer that's going to bring it in exact lengths. Maybe they're numbered. You remember this? You don't remember the Sears and Roebucks where they used to buy the house from the Sears and Roebuck magazine? You ever studied that?
No.
You need to study it, because they would send the house out and the people would put it together like number 1, number 2, number 3.
Yeah. Like
There's a
kid
lot
homes.
of a kid home.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's still some out there.
Absolutely.
Here's another thing. What is your usually electric bills run on those? Do you have any statistics on that?
I have one statistic from a lady who lives in one of our very small tiny homes in North Georgia. It's like a little over 200 square feet, and her combined utility bills are like $40 a month average. So that's a big affordability draw for people, is they're just efficient by design.
Do you have foam insulation or?
Spray foam. We spray foam the walls, which adds to the rigidity of the structure. We also spray foam the ceilings and the underbelly.
Do you have there's a 2x6 exterior walls or 2x4?
2x4, but it depends with modular. So if the building code calls for 2x6s, then we'll do that. But all of our tiny homes are 2x4.
Some of them, if you use the foam, you don't have to use 2x6s. You can use the 2 because it adds the rigidity, like you're saying.
Yeah, it depends on R value requirements in certain states and things like that.
I built a couple of buildings where we ordered prefab walls. They'd bring the walls out like they would the trusses, and we set the walls and set the trusses. That's prefab too. Prefab's a bad name for it.
Yeah, I still to this day don't know what prefab means because people use it so differently.
Yeah.
So I think that most people think prefab is like kit homes, pulling the walls and putting them up together. There's certain people who would probably say that modular construction is prefab. This is the problem. All the terminology, if you put it in a Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap, and it can get really confusing.
Yeah, because prefab, a lot of things are prefabbed on the job now. Even the roof trusses. In the 30s, they'd have never dreamed you'd bring the trusses out. So people eventually get used to it, to what it is. But do you think that are a lot of these being used as auxiliary housing behind people's? How does that? Say I've got a house and I want my mother-in-law going to live in the backyard or something. Is that a thing, or is that a negative, or how do you see that?
That's a really big thing right now. So accessory dwelling units.
Yeah, accessory dwelling units
are sort of the low-hanging fruit to pass polity to assist with density in an urban area to get more housing quickly. Chattanooga's done it. It's been 2 years now. They've enacted an ADU ordinance. So that's going to be a core part of what offsite construction can help with, because I talk to general contractors in Chattanooga who say, hey, I get calls for people wanting ADUs, but we just can't do it. Like, it's too expensive for us to do it. And that's where a modular manufacturer can come and help. Because GCs, and you can't fault them for this, are going to prioritize where they can make the most money, which is not going to be on a 700 square foot ADU in someone's backyard. So you can hire someone to do that, but it's going to take a long time because you're probably not going to be front of the line. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, they're not going to have the expertise and the buying power to build this stuff small. It takes a lot of skill to build small stuff.
Yes. Yeah. I think there's a lot of people coming to the ADU game right now because there's a huge need for it, and there's a lot of places passing these ordinances to allow for them. I mean, Massachusetts just did it statewide. If you own a single family home in Massachusetts, by right, you can add an ADU in your backyard. So you have builders coming to the scene trying to capitalize on this. But then for us, we've been building small homes for 10 years, and now we're just going to build them a little bit bigger. But from what we know about designing small space, we're just applying that to ADU design, single family home design, and using space more intentionally.
So what's your biggest unit that you build?
Right now, we're still deep in product development. The largest one that we're currently working on is about 1,300 square feet, and that would be 2 modules connecting, so each around 700 square feet, so that you can get some bigger square footages.
So that's not a tiny home.
That's a home. That's a starter home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a modular home, I
Yeah.
guess, right?
It's a home.
So do you have the building inspector or the electrical inspector come down and inspect the walls like I would have to have? I got to
Yes.
call him before I put insulation in. Do you have that?
Yes.
So
Yes.
who comes down there? Our local building inspector, or do you have
The
a?
state. The state comes out.
Why not the local building inspector? Because it's
You'll have to double check me on this, but I think you have to have a modular inspection certification, and
Oh.
there's just not that many of those. So usually our inspectors come from farther away, but they're pretty responsive because they're also just not serving a whole lot of builders, if that
that'd
makes
be a
sense.
good career, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
Be the guy that
Yeah.
does that.
it's a good time to get in
You
on
could
it.
come in and do 10 at a time or something.
Right. So if we work on a volume order where we're doing 20 some of the same thing, they come really often when we build the first unit, and then less and less as
Yeah.
we go on.
Yeah. So how big's the warehouse?
92,000 square feet. And that is from just moving out of 9,000 square feet.
9,000? Boy, that wouldn't be very big at all, would it, to
Yeah.
build a house?
We only had 4 bays at that facility, and the new one, we've, many times over multiplied our capacity. So we went from building about 30 tiny homes on wheels a year to this year we have over 100 modular homes in our build schedule, and we're going to do that all in a year.
How many in a year?
100 this year and probably 150 next year.
So what do? Take them to, you roll it? Are they all on wheels?
No, the modular homes are built on just a floor joist system, and we've manufactured little, I don't know what you call them, we put wheels underneath them so we can slide them from one bay to the other, and then we have automatic cranes, a set of 4 that we can put on the sides of the home and lift it up, back a trailer underneath it, and so it gets delivered on a flatbed, and when you lift it up, it's just the floor joist system that gets set permanently on a foundation. So it looks really similar to what our homes look like underneath.
So the person has to have the foundation already in and the sewer already there, and
Yep.
maybe power and.
All of those things, yep. And so for a modular project, we're really, if we're talking about an individual ADU build, for example, we are the client of the general contractor. And so if someone comes to us and wants one of our homes, we can do that. We'll direct them to find a general contractor or give them a recommendation for a general contractor that we can interface with, and then they hire us. But our modular certified plan sets are going to include the foundation plan. And so we can give that to the general contractor. They know what to do. They're excited about getting a project done way faster, and then we come in and do all the hard part so they don't have to navigate subcontractors and weather and all of those things.
So they'd have to have the driveway in, the land cleared, the drainage around the house, and
They'd have to have their foundation and their utilities. Some site work, just depending on the site, could probably wait. Like, you don't have to have your road finished in most cases. And maybe you don't want to if you're bringing in an 80,000 pound truck or something.
80,000 pounds. Is that the weight of them?
No, I think the heaviest ones that we've done have been around 30,000. I think the mass capacity you can haul in a semi truck is 80. I think that's where I was pulling that number.
30,000. That's be
Yeah.
what, about 15 Bobcats or something?
I don't know
Pretty
how
heavy.
much yeah, it's pretty heavy. I think
15 tons?
I think you can ballpark like 500 pounds per linear foot.
Probably, yeah.
So if you have like a 45-foot home, it'd be half of that, 20 2.5.
I think they calculate for the
I need to
down
calculate.
pressure or
Yeah.
something.
Can't do this in my head anymore.
Well, that takes a lot of logistics, doesn't it? From the time somebody buy that would eliminate change orders.
Right. It does eliminate change orders, or almost as much, because you just can't change any change that you make. It has to go back to the state to get recertified.
Yeah, right.
And there's a cost to that.
Yeah.
So you need to have your ducks in a row, which it fronts all of the design work
Sure,
and all
yeah.
of that. But then you can just sit back and
Just wait.
let everything happen and let it be smooth sailing. But you're right, as far as people being, it's a lot of moving parts. So with the tiny homes on wheels that we've built, there's a lot of resilient individuals who can navigate that process on their own and sort of be their own project manager. It's more complicated with the modular build. So we've really positioned ourselves to work more with developers of our homes so that they can manage all of those parts. They've probably worked in construction before and are really sick and tired of dealing with the headache of site construction and subcontractors, all of that. They come to us. And then in the end, we can still help more people, but just indirectly by working with the developer and having more of our homes installed.
What are the smallest homes you have?
The smallest homes that we have are 206 square feet.
What would that be? Like a 10 by
8.5 by 24. And then there's a loft in there too, but that's not official square footage because you can't stand up in it. But technically it'd be another 80 square feet, you know. And those dimensions, when you build that small, we also build it to the road dimensions where you don't need permits.
Yeah, that's the problem, yeah.
Which is why it's 8.5 as opposed to 10.
10, I think 10 you have to have, over 10 you have to have I had a storage building hauled last week and I had to get a guy that had a permit to haul something 10 feet wide.
Yep. Get your banners.
Isn't that funny? And I had you here today and I wouldn't have known anything about that. I thought they could just haul it if they wanted to haul it.
Right. We know all about that stuff, you know.
When he brought it out there, I walked in it and I thought, boy, I could about live in here. And it was 10 by 16.
Yeah. There you go. That's all you
That's
need, nothing you
160
don't.
square feet, wasn't it? Do you have to have a special order sinks? Because when you get down below a certain square footage, do you start to get some special order items like a special size stove and refrigerator and stuff like that?
Sometimes. I think for us, it depends on the model. Certainly for the smallest homes, we end up buying smaller appliances, which sometimes when you buy these out of the norm,
They're expensive.
they're expensive. So smaller appliances, like smaller dishwashers, are twice as much as a normal
Oh yeah,
dishwasher.
you just have to, and really in something 208 square feet, you don't really need a dishwasher. You know.
Yeah, how many dishes are you needing?
Yeah, they're eating. You know, they're just those people that are simple like that probably eating on paper plates.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But so to that, when the tiny home movement started, you're absolutely right. Like people were very minimalist about it. Don't care about dishwashers. Don't care about washing machines half the time. Now, it's way more people interested in tiny homes as a viable permanent housing from the affordability standpoint. So, whereas when the tiny home movement first started, it was like there was pride around living as small as possible and as minimal as possible.
Yeah, minimalistic.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily as true anymore because most of what we do is at the max square footage that is allowed. So most of our tiny home on wheels sales are at that 400 square foot mark. And at that size, we can still keep all your creature comforts, you know, full size range, full fridge, washer dryer, all of those things, dishwasher that makes sense. So it is funny to see that shift happen and more people, more demographics and not so much about like the tiny home.
I believe there's a big market for just those tiny homes, even at that level.
Yeah, you would see them everywhere, like I was saying, if we would just allow for them.
Do they usually stack washer and dryers or side by sides?
Well, I think it depends on the model. We've got a couple of each, but then the majority of the true tiny homes, we do combo washer dryers. But when we're talking about,
What is that?
it's
Is
an
that-
all-in-one unit.
That's where it drains the water out? Are those
Yeah.
expensive?
I think it's kind of comparable with like a washer dryer set. Again, it depends. You can, sky's the limit with how fancy you want your appliances to be.
They may be like $3,000 or something.
I think they're cheaper than that. I think
I never could figure out how exactly they could get that to work efficiently.
Yeah, I'm not.
But
I'm
that
not-
doesn't see, I don't think why you couldn't. Just have it drain the water and then turn the heat on.
Yeah.
But you don't see that very often.
No, it's very niche. Yeah, I think you might. I don't know. Do you see it a lot in Europe? The combo washer dryers.
No, I put a couple of them in houses and they were expensive. And, but it wasn't because of space, because if you could get rid of that 3x3 area for a washer or dryer, it would, because a side by side, you have to have 5 total feet and really you need 6 feet total in front of it because you can't open the door. And
Right.
so you got that, it takes up a huge amount of space.
Yeah.
Takes up a 5x6.
In the modular homes, it's not going to be a problem. There's enough space at that square footage to do whatever you want with your appliances.
Yeah.
But let's say you're in 206 square feet. All of a sudden, that matters quite a bit. And so you've just got one cubby for your combo washer dryer. And some of our models, the upper cabinet is where your on-demand hot water heater is. And those 2 appliances in a normal house would take up 10 square feet. I don't know.
Do you prefer a certain brand of on-demand water heaters?
We've used Rheem and Takagi a lot. Yeah.
I put a bunch of those in, but I'm just not totally sold on them. But maybe you hadn't had any problems with them?
I'm sold on the propane powered ones because the electric on-demand units, when they start up, they pull so much amperage that the electric companies don't like them.
Don't you have to have you have to have a storage tank with them to store the hot water in order to have enough to take a shower?
No. There's probably a setup for that I just haven't seen. But yeah, with the propane, it's really quick. It heats up the water almost instantaneously, and then you're not going to run out unless you run out of propane. I've never
But I wonder what the statistics are about how much power it takes. I put a bunch of those in, and I hadn't had any problem, especially with propane. I just put 10 in one house.
What was the
one
electric
house.
service how many amps for the breaker box?
Oh, it was 800 amps.
Yeah.
It was a big house.
Yeah, I think the most we've ever
They
done
had
is 200.
10 instant water heaters.
Yeah, that's a lot.
10. Can you imagine? When in most houses, one is supposed to be enough.
Yeah.
I've just found that sometimes if it'll decrease the flow. If you demand a certain temperature, it'll decrease the flow if it can't bring it to you.
Interesting. Maybe.
But housing is, with this theory, you could say, well, just move into a 600-unit apartment complex. But I think that Americans are still a little bit, they will pay for one thing, and that's a little for independence.
Yeah.
And I believe that they want to have their own yard, even if it's small. They want their own parking space. They don't care if the house is small, but they do want, I don't think they want somebody living above them or beside them on a long-term basis.
Yeah. I think for me, I wanted my own walls. I didn't want to share walls with anyone. We've all been in a bad situation where you've got a neighbor that's making noise and it's just uncomfortable and you don't have control over who those neighbors are. So there's always the possibility that they could move out and someone else moves in. But if
Or
you
can
have,
make it crawl through the attic,
yeah.
look down.
So I
they're
just wanted
literally
my
that
own.
far away from you. Can you imagine if the wall wasn't there, they'd be,
It's awful.
couldn't argue with anybody.
Yeah.
I think they'll get away from that in time. What'd you study? Why'd you go to Ohio to school?
My degrees are in music. So I have my master's in flute performance, and that's actually the first reason why I moved to Chattanooga is because I play in the Chattanooga Symphony.
Now that's interesting. Were you online wearing a red dress playing the flute?
Yeah.
I saw that.
Hey, that's me. On YouTube, probably.
Yeah, you're quite popular on that.
Oh,
I
boy.
thought I was looking up the wrong person.
Yeah, that's me. So there's a pretty good music school up there, and that's why I went up to school.
What kind
in
of
Ohio.
the flute? Now that's what Citizen Kane. What was that guy's name, Glenn?
Jethro Tull.
No, I'm thinking earlier than that. Citizen Kane. You know, his mind always went back to his. You know what I'm talking about. You know, he did karate, and it's like a gun smoke with karate.
You're thinking of the Kung Fu guy.
Kung Fu, yeah. What was his name?
Something Kane.
Kane. I think it might have just been Kane. You're too young for that. But didn't he play a flute?
Yeah.
He played a flute.
That's cool.
James Galway.
James
Yeah.
Galway? Yeah.
I've played for him.
I'm a
Yeah.
musician.
Oh, you
yeah.
played for James
I
Galway?
did. Yeah.
Yeah, he plays with
Dexter.
Dexter Thomas Band. He's very good.
Nice.
So why the flute?
Oh boy. I started playing when I was 12 in middle school, and I really just wanted an easy A. For some reason, I was really bought into just having a good GPA, and I was like, band's gonna be easy. And I didn't want anything heavy, so it was gonna be either flute or clarinet. And then I didn't want to deal with reeds. That seemed cumbersome, so I said, okay, I'll play the flute because that's what all the pretty girls play. So that's
So
what I'm gonna do.
there's no reeds in a flute?
No wooden reeds.
Mhm.
Yeah. So and then the rest, I guess, is history.
Are you just good at it?
I'm all right, you know.
What's the most rock and roll song that was done with a flute?
I feel like this is a Jethro Tull answer that I should know. There's a guy called Greg Patillo or Patillo. I can never remember how you pronounce it, but he beatboxes with his flute because since it just rests here and there's nothing over your mouth, you can kind of like make sounds.
Oh, I
into
see,
it.
yeah.
It sounds really cool.
So it rests on your mouth?
Yeah, you just blow across.
Is that right?
And it's the same principle that makes airplanes fly that makes a flute resonate. So when you have a wing splitting wind, 50% goes up and 50% goes under. And it's about creating that lift.
Golly.
So when you're playing flute, you lose 50% of your air. It doesn't go in the instrument, but the part that does goes in, and if you get it right, it resonates and spirals and vibrates the instrument.
So in a sense, you are doing what your father was doing.
There we go. He should be so proud. Yeah.
So you went there to study. You got a degree in music?
Yep, music performance. And I still use that. So I play with a couple other orchestras just freelancing.
You don't play the piano or nothing else. You just stay with that, the flute.
Just the flute. Yeah, when you get to like a professional level with it, you're specializing. Very few of my colleagues play more than one instrument.
What's that one that you play to the side?
That's flute.
What
That's
about that
the
one the flute's not done here?
No, that would be either clarinet or oboe that you're thinking of.
Okay.
Yeah.
The flute is what the Patriots always walking with.
They had the fife, which is a type of flute. It's a little bit shorter, but yeah, that's the right idea.
Now, why would it be shorter?
I don't
Just
know.
does it sound different?
It's probably louder because I actually play piccolo more than I play flute anymore, which is really short and also really loud. Like the decibel level starts above a jet engine. It's very loud. So I would imagine that, and I haven't done any research on this, but I would imagine they play the fife because it's louder.
Do you think you'd play it the same way?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just a matter of what you're using, what the instrument is.
It's
huh?
just probably different fingerings, but it's the same concept. Make the plan fly.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? You don't play the harp or nothing like that?
No, I would love to play the harp. I play piano, but I'm real bad at it.
Have you seen those twins on the internet, the dueling harps?
No,
Boy, they can play anything on it. I mean, anything.
that's cool.
I mean, they can play Guns N' Roses or whatever. It's really neat.
Mm-hmm.
So you get paid to do that?
I do, yeah. I think that's another, I guess we're getting off of construction, but people don't realize that musicians do get paid. Like the Chattanooga Symphony is a job. And that what you're talking about, what you see with those dueling harps, being able to play anything,
Yeah.
all of your local professional musicians can do that. Like we can just look at something and play it most of the time. I remember when I was a kid, we went to like Universal Studios or something, and there was a musician just walking around to tables, and it was my parents and me and my brother, and he's like, taking requests, what do you want me to play? And we said, play Smash Mouth All-Star. And he just played it, and I thought it was just mind-blowing, just incredible. But now,
With a harp?
with a guitar and singing, like he just did
That's
it.
a hard song to play, I would think.
I don't think so anymore. I think I thought that as a kid. I was so blown away.
It
but
was an
then-
unusual song, isn't it? Oh, really? So,
yeah, I was like, he's not
Yeah.
gonna know this.
Yeah.
And then he did. So you train your ear, and you can just do those things.
See, I don't have that ability.
Yeah, it
At
takes
all,
a lot
no.
of practice. Yeah,
I think it may be a gift.
yeah. I think it's a spectrum, right? It comes easily for some people. Other people can get it if you work really hard at it, and then some people just can't get it.
So, were you thinking you were going to be a professional musician, or is that just a way to get a degree?
I think I wanted to be a professional musician, and then there's a funny thing that happens when you turn some of your like extracurricular passions into a job, is that you kind of lose your passion for it. And so I always say I'm not the best representation of what a professional musician is, because I have so many other interests. And the people, like my colleagues and some of my best friends, they live and breathe it, and it's all that they can ever think about doing. They also teach private lessons. And I'm just not like that. I mean, when I started working for Wind River, I had no experience in construction, and it's been way more fulfilling because I just feel like I'm doing something that's much more worthwhile. And that's not to say that cultures don't need live orchestras and music, but we kind of need housing a little bit too, and it just feels like I'm able to help more people.
You needing to buy the house and ending up with the 800 square foot house, do you think that inspired you?
Absolutely. I tell this story all the time because I promised myself that I would never lose sight of how lucky I was in that situation. And
You were very lucky.
I was so lucky. And now the people who aren't as lucky are in my inbox that I'm responding to and trying to help. And I would say that, I'm excited about our shift going into modular, because working with developers is going to allow us to help more people, because even going tiny is such a trailblazing thing for someone to do. Like, you have to be really resilient to pull that off. And for that, I would say for every one person that we've been able to help, like build a tiny home on wheels for, there's probably 1,000 people that we can't, because they don't know how to navigate zoning ordinances. They don't know how to navigate getting their infrastructure and their utilities and all of it. It's overwhelming to so many people.
They had
That's
no
really
clue, just
discouraging.
like I don't have a clue about playing the flute.
Yeah. And so part of my job has been breaking hearts, and that sucks. So
And really, you don't, a lot of that zoning stuff, you really don't know for sure that you can't till you start doing it. And that's a problem, because
Right.
you get a lot of vague answers, I'm sure.
I think yes, because people don't know what questions they should be
They
asking.
don't, yeah.
And how would they? Like, I had a friend just yesterday that I was talking to, and he says, I'm going to put an ADU in my backyard. And I said, that's fantastic. He said, I'm going to show you the plan. He showed me the plan, and I was immediately like, you're not going to be able to do this. And I told him, like, 2 reasons right off the bat. Like, this is too tall and it's too big. And so people, then I sent him the zoning ordinances today. I said, here are the stipulations that you're going to have to abide by. And he's like, oh my gosh, you have to show me where you found this. So people don't know where to look. And why would they? So they get all of this hopium, you know, and then they get let down because they can't do what they want to.
And even if you find the zoning rules, you'd have to look for any amendments. You know, that can get complicated too. And then you look at the subdivision restrictions.
Yes.
Maybe the plat has restrictions.
The setbacks.
Even the setbacks.
Parking spaces.
And is there, you know, you got city setbacks, subdivision setbacks, and county setbacks, and homeowner association setbacks. So you have to go with the one that's the most restrictive. And so you have to research all of that.
Yeah.
It's very complicated. It's going to come a time where you almost have to hire a liaison
Yeah.
to determine what you can do. And they wouldn't know exactly for sure.
You know what's helping a lot with this lately, and I'm excited to see this, is a really good utilization of AI, that you can train AI to interpret zoning code for you.
Boy, it'd be hard to... I could see where that might be possible.
So that would just take
If
a lot
AI
of
would
legwork
know
and confusion.
where all to look.
Right. Yeah.
Do you think that pride of ownership is still a thing as far as living in a 600 square foot or 600 unit apartment complex with a weight room and a swimming pool and all these things? Do you think people are going to levitate more towards that, or do you think that people still, there's a pride in ownership?
I think if so, it's just changed so dramatically. So I think people, like we talked about, wanting independence more than anything. I think it's more, there's a pride in independence, not necessarily the ownership itself, but not having to rely on someone else. So like van lifers, there's a lot of pride in that. They own that van, but it's not a home, it's just their independence.
Now, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. So maybe it's not necessarily all pride of ownership. It's just the fact that it's theirs, independence. So you think maybe independence is more important. Which is more important, independence or security to people, or freedom? Or is it all the same thing?
I think that if people are true to themselves, it's independence. But that a lot of times you get fed this message about needing a certain level of security, without getting political about things.
What would you define as security?
Well, for me, I live alone as a single female, and that means being able to protect myself and securing my property. So like I put keyless entry on my doors. I own a firearm, things like that. That's security to me. But
You
it's
have a
also
deadbolt also?
a what?
A deadbolt also on your door?
Yeah. But also just like security is more so financial than ever because so many people are living paycheck to paycheck. So there's a lot of fear in what's going to happen with the economy. What if I lose my job? Things like that. So as a part of physical security, but then there's also financial security and having a backup plan if things hit the fan. And I think there's a lot of fear around that right now.
What about Maslow's hierarchy of, you ever studied that? Maslow's hierarchy of needs? I think the first thing is security. So when we get past being secure, then we want other stuff.
Okay.
What makes you so concerned about security?
I think, I lived in my house alone for almost 4 years without enough security. And then some things, some weird stuff happened, like instances where I just like, well, a smart person wouldn't assume that nothing's going to happen here, and just being overly cautious. And I think that women have to deal with that sometimes more than men.
You think women are generally more afraid like that because they're, well, I mean, some aren't weaker, but you assume that
Yeah.
they're,
Yeah, I'm not kidding myself. Like they teach these self-defense courses. There's nothing I'm going to be able to do if someone twice my size comes at me,
and if there is, you're not going to do it in time.
Yeah.
Even if you knew how to kick or something.
Yeah. So I'm not kidding myself about any of that.
So, do you think, you like living in Chattanooga?
I love Chattanooga.
Where you live, like, not to know exactly where you live, but you live towards the river or where?
Almost Red Bank, so North Chattanooga. Yeah, 10 minutes from the river. It's nice. It's one of those, like, it's a bunch of small homes around me. Most of them are 1,000 square feet or less, and the kind of neighborhoods.
Is that
we're
off Highway
building.
27 or something?
It's between Hickson Pike and Dayton Boulevard. It's
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, it's a nice area, isn't it?
It is.
It's almost had a revival,
yeah,
hadn't it?
yeah.
You ever go
Because,
down-
like you said, that's what people want. They don't want big houses.
They don't want it to be in the city where they're crowded.
Mm-hmm.
You go down 58 Highway any?
58,
Towards Decatur or anything?
Decatur,
Or Dayton?
Dayton. Sometimes, like for hiking and stuff.
Where do you
Yeah.
hike up there?
Cumberland Trail. I don't go up that way a lot. I usually hike more in Cloudland or out of the state somewhere.
You have a stick
No,
you walk with? Just walk?
I'm running, man.
Running?
Yeah,
How fast?
very slow.
Just a good jog?
Yeah, just getting
How
out
long
there.
you been running?
I started running in high school, I think. I don't
Does
know.
it make you feel better? Get your
I-
heart pumping?
The weird thing that I like about running, and it gets back to independence, this keeps coming back. Like, it's trail running that I do, and there's a certain level of self-awareness and self-preservation that comes into play when you're in the woods and there's no one around you
Yeah.
for miles. And, like, I don't like racing because you have aid stations, you have sweepers, like, you're never gonna be lost. Someone's gonna find you, someone's gonna save you if you break your leg or something. And it almost takes away the thing that I like about trail running, which is you are responsible for your well-being. And it's on you if something happens to get you out of that situation. And that's what I like about it.
Is it an adrenaline?
Sure. Yeah. But also peace. It's a weird balance of those things.
That is I know exactly what you're talking about, and I can't describe it either. But it's a feeling, isn't it? That's just
Yeah.
it's almost like I'm okay or something, or I've made it. I made it through that, I'll make it through this.
It's exactly like that. I think it's also just primal. It's how humans operated way back when. They were out in the woods during the day, probably many miles from their shelter, and they didn't have cell phones. They didn't have forms of communications to call for help. Like, they were responsible for themselves.
Running out on the trail in the woods, subject to bears or whatever, is not unlike your father hang gliding.
Right.
It's both a risk, a danger, facing danger.
I think so. There's something to putting yourself in situations where you face danger or face uncertainty. You take control of the liminality in your life. When there's a catalytic event that just sort of catapults you in a direction that you weren't expecting, you handle it better because you've exposed yourself to that feeling, whether it be through trail running or hang gliding or whatever it is that people do. The more you go looking for that and confronting it and becoming comfortable with it, the better you deal with risk in business, or if something happens with your family or any number of things. You're just better mentally prepared for those, and they don't rattle you as much. Like, for example, when COVID hit, a lot of people didn't know what to do. They lost their identity when they lost their jobs, didn't know how to spend their time. There's a lot of people who got depressed, went to counseling. And I watched that happen to my friends, and I felt horrible for them. But you have to do something about that so that you're resilient against it the next time it happens. Like, you have to recognize that you were weak in that moment, and how do you become stronger?
You know, I agree with that, but I've got a slightly different take.
Okay.
And this is just a maybe, but I've been thinking about this lately. Maybe it's because we want to be proud of ourselves, to ourselves.
Yeah. It's always you versus you, man. That's all
I
it's
mean,
about.
you know, because you ever wonder if we're just if we're set? I know it's going to sound crazy, but we're just in this vehicle. I just happen to be stuck with this vehicle, and I'm just looking through these eyes. But I want to be proud of myself or my vehicle,
Yeah.
and want to feel like that I don't know, just a sort of a self-esteem, maybe that's what I'm trying to get at, self-esteem. Rather than just the dope. I mean, I don't get a big kick out of knowing I can read a book or read an article, but I can get excited, proud of myself for, you know, I ride bicycles, you know, like riding 30 miles or 35 miles, and it was hot, but we made it. And
Yeah.
I didn't have much water, but I dropped my water bottle, but I made it.
Yeah.
You know.
I think it's really important for people to do that, like to seek validation from yourself as opposed to external sources, because
Well,
you're
that's hard,
setting
isn't it?
yourself up for failure when you try and get that from anyone else but yourself.
And they're not going to give it to you. No. I mean, your mother might.
Or you're just putting yourself in a fragile state on a daily basis.
Constantly.
To where someone you don't even know can impact your mood by something that they say.
Do you think people seek validation constantly?
All day long. Yeah. I think everyone does. I mean, no one's immune to that. But it's the self-awareness, you know, developing that and then trying to take control and just every day working on yourself. That's the most important thing. It's just always be working on yourself.
When did you become sort of independent?
I became independent in 2019 when I left a relationship, and I never thought, like, a lot of people stay in relationships too long because they don't know if they can stand on their own 2 feet. And it is very scary and very risky because I had never stood on my own 2 feet. He'd always been there. And I uprooted myself from that situation and just sort of knew I would figure it out. But it was incredibly scary, and your feet don't touch the ground, and you never know when they're going to touch the ground again. But it all worked out. But like in those situations, you have to take massive risk. And the funny thing about that for me was that I did that in September of 2019, and then COVID hit 6 months later. And so I had already come to terms with uncertainty in my life. And then when COVID hit, it was like, okay, this is fine too. Like,
I think you might like navigating uncertainty.
well, I think once you do it and you come out the other side, that's incredibly empowering. And you might become drawn to that feeling, you know.
When you went to Ohio to study music, did you have friends that you went to that school with, or did you make friends when you got there?
I made friends when I got there. I didn't know anyone. I had only visited the school once. Yeah, I just moved 8 hours away from home.
Do you think working with these homes is trying to help people with their startup and with
Yes.
their challenges? Does that make sense?
Yes, that's like I work in sales, but I'm not I'm not an inherent salesperson. I'm not going to sell someone something they don't need. But the reason why I love my job is because it's fulfilling in exactly the way that you say it is. Like, I was able to find a way for myself, and I recognize how lucky I was, and all I want to do is help other people do the same thing. Yeah, and I can't say enough good things about the leadership team and the executive team. And it's all, a lot of companies, when they grow, they sort of lose the integrity and the culture, and that's remained at the center of everything that they do, and they care so much. And you know, we're still basically a startup. We've been in business for 10 years, and we just keep reinvesting in the company and growing, so something's always new, and we're always just doing the grunt work of getting our name out there and getting the contracts. And when you have a small team, everyone has to pull their weight, and I look to my left and right, and these are people who are with me doing the thing, doing the hard thing, and building the company. And when you have a team like that, and you recognize everyone trying so hard, that builds a rapport where you just trust them so much, and you just keep at it. Because I think great teams make great businesses, and there's no one I'd rather do it with.
How many do they employ?
In March, it was around 50, and then in May, it started growing, and we're now at like 110. So we've over...
Is this your only location?
Yes.
In Cleveland?
Yes.
Why Cleveland?
It was, so Travis will tell this story better, he's our CEO, but the property became available, and it was on the market for a really long time, and it was just perfect. It's 33 acres, it's pretty flat, and it's close to where we were, so we wanted to stay close because we wanted to retain our employees. We didn't want to make people drive super far, you know. And it had been on the market for a really long time, and then they decided to put an offer in on it, but they had accepted an offer, I hope I'm getting this story right, the previous day, which is just like, how does that happen?
Yeah.
And I guess there were some problems with closing that sale, and then they came in and gave another offer, and they were right, like the previous buyer backed out or whatever happened, and we were able to get that property. So it was pretty serendipitous. And we've developed about 10 acres of that, so we have room for 2 more facilities the same size on that property. If things really get going, we can grow and we can stay there.
Boy, just in 10 years, that's really remarkable, isn't it?
It's insane.
That's growing 10 times in 10 years.
Well, think about it this way. We built just over 100 homes in the first 9 years of business, and then the 10th year we did 100 in 1 year.
Do you think that was just going to happen, or did something happen that made it do so much better?
It was the shift to adding modular, because the tiny home industry has so many barriers to growth right now that if you really want to get to the next level, you have to add that product offering, which is a good thing for many reasons. But it was also that Wind River was approached by a stakeholder in 2020 that wanted to grow the company and asked the owners if they wanted to do that. And
What does a stakeholder mean?
It
Just
is
a shareholder? Or?
It's an investor.
Yeah.
So this was a high net worth family in the area that he had done really well for himself, came from nothing and built an empire from oil and gas out in Texas, I think, and wanted to give back. He started getting up there and wondering about what he wanted his legacy to be. So he has a track record for investing in companies that do something worthwhile. And I think that the team is really, really fortunate in that regard, because, you know, we have a board of directors, but they trust the leadership team to guide the company, and they're very hands-off. And
Sounds like this Travis guy does pretty good.
Yeah. So Travis built a tiny home in 2014 that was 192 square feet. And that's where it all started, because he did that so that he could get financial freedom and have a place for him and his wife to live. And he did that in his dad's front yard. And people started driving by and saying, oh, I want one of those. So then they started building, you know, you dream it, we'll build it, one-off custom tiny homes on wheels. And he said, well, I guess we should start a business. And they moved into like a pole barn, and we're building homes outside in the dirt, literally. And then in 2018, they moved into the 9,000 square foot facility and grew it a little more. then they were approached by the investor. And so for the past 3 or 4 years now, we've had this strategic plan to design that building, and then our investor funded the construction of it. So it's built to suit for us. And to add the modular product offerings and to reposition ourselves to work with developers. So it's all been very carefully planned out. It's a company that doesn't want to grow too much too soon. Everything's very calculated. So it seems like a big jump to go from 9,000 to 92,000.
And from 50 to 102.
Yeah. But it's really just the next step. I don't think there is anything in between. Like, you kind of got to take a risk.
Is this Travis guy young, or how old is he?
I don't know how old he is. I think he's, oh gosh.
He don't want us to tell it.
I think he's around 40 somewhere.
That's pretty good. Is he from Chattanooga originally?
I think so. Yeah, I think he's from Cleveland, actually.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I think he grew up not far from where the new facility is.
I may know him.
Yeah.
What's his name?
Travis Pike.
Pike?
And Caleb Knowles family. And Travis is going to have a baby if he hasn't already. I think it might be this weekend. So he's about to welcome
some
his
Pikes. I
second
grew
one.
up with next to some Pikes.
Yeah?
On
might
the
be
north
them.
end. On the north end. But so what's the cheapest? What can a person expect to spend on a tiny home versus a modular home?
Well, anyone in construction, I feel like, answers this the same way, right? It depends. So we're a luxury builder. Everything's high-end materials, and we have skilled labor hand building the homes. We hand build cabinetry. So what you can expect is a really well-built product, but there's also a price tag with that. Where I guess I'll talk in terms of square footage numbers, since size of a home can vary. At our best, if we're trying to value engineer something, I think we end up in the mid-twos. But then it's really common for us to be 300-400 square feet, or $400 a square foot. And it can go up from there. It's really easy these days to get up, depending on the level of finishes that people want.
Oh, you can change the cost with one faucet.
Yeah.
The square footage.
Yeah. Like, I put a keyless entry on my door. It was $600. Like,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
absorbing that little thing
Yeah.
in 2 square feet.
And
you know?
that doesn't include the battery, right? Don't they
Yeah.
have batteries on those now?
Yeah.
So let's say, would you say is generally the minimum cost
The
of
smallest
housing?
Oh.
Don't even mention wheels or nothing. Just
Yep.
how much does it cost for me to get into something where I can call my own and I can watch TV?
A Wind River home?
Yeah.
I would say the most average price of what we do is around $150 right now.
What's the low end?
90, 100, somewhere around there, and that's directly related to size.
Yeah. So maybe for 90,000, I could get somewhere that I could call my own if I had my own land and my own hookups, etc.
Yeah.
Do you do any financing, or you have any method for people to finance?
So it depends on the build category. The important thing to know about modular homes, I think, is that once it's installed, it's real estate. So you can get a traditional mortgage on a modular home, and that has been a key barrier to tiny homes for as long as the movement's been going on, because they're personal property. A lot of people don't realize they have VIN numbers. These are technically vehicles that get
Yeah.
registered with the DMV, and so the loans available to them are few and far between. The lenders have just been slow to respond to the need for this type of financing. So you get personal property loans or RV-style loans, and the rates are higher when they're already high for mortgages.
Well, that opens up a window for somebody to make some money on financing,
yeah.
doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's difficult to collateralize something that can move.
Only Easy Auto could do that.
There you go.
So, well, it sounds like that's a really. So if somebody wants to buy one, they call you. They can call you.
Yes.
Call the office.
Yeah, all roads lead to Rome, and we're small enough that any way you reach out is going to end up to me. So, or someone else in our business development team.
So somebody calls you and says, "I just want to sit down and talk to somebody and talk about what are the possibilities?
Yep.
They come
That
down
would
there
be-
and set an appointment or something? You got a meeting room?
It's usually phone call first, because we need to understand where they're at in the planning process and if it makes sense to be talking to a builder. Because a lot of people, when they're, well, like an individual, let's say, you want to jump to the fun part, like my friend that I was talking to wants to put an ADU in his backyard. But really, step one is, do you know that you can do this project? Have you checked, do you have property and have you checked the zoning? And that's usually the first questions that I ask someone. And if it seems like we've got a plan going, you know, if it's a developer, like, do you have a civil engineer on your team? Do you have a site plan? Do you have a concept? And just seeing how far along they are. And then if it makes sense and we're all aligned on everything, come on down. Let's show you how we build things. Let's sit down and touch some of our material samples and meet our team. And I think that that's really the most powerful thing for us, is having people out and seeing what we do in person. Because any questions that you have about quality or the manufacturing process, the design process, it all gets answered. And I think people leave their tours really convinced that, okay, we can do something cool here.
Sounds like you got a really good business there.
I think it's pretty great.
You ever go back home to Georgia any?
Yeah. So you're a cyclist.
Yeah.
I just finished doing the Silver Comet Trail.
Oh, I rode that.
Have you?
Yeah. Did you do the full route? Did
Not
you
in one go. I did
Did you get a
sections
badge?
of it.
Don't they still give you
Do I get
badges?
badges?
I think
want
they give you a
badge.
badge.
I gotta get one of those.
Yeah.
Do I have to do it in one go though?
I think you do. I
Okay.
think you have to. Isn't it what 200? I rode 72 miles.
Yeah, that's like the one way. The one way is like
Yeah.
that long.
No, I started at half and went up and down instead of going. Boy, that's really nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
I
Did you
mean,
do
it-
the Alabama section too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wide and everything. It's not 2% grade. It's just a fun day. And
Yeah. I spent my little my summer project this year is driving down there and doing sections of it, like 20, 30 miles at a time, something
Yeah.
like that.
Well, you can do it in a day if you start early.
Yeah, but what I really want is someone to bus my vehicle to the other end so that I don't
Yeah.
have to do it all the way back. 'Cause then
I'll tell you
it's-
what I did. The guys I was with, we got there about 7 o'clock and we rode it and rode back. And it was late. And, you know, when you get done, you don't say nicely, you just say, see y'all later. And everybody jumps in the car. So I went to the gas station. I don't even remember where I was at, but it was just after I got back in my car. And I cracked my window and I thought, I'm just going to lay here for a second and rest my eyes. Woke up 1 hour later. Car still running. In the middle of somewhere in, I don't even know where it was. I forget where it was. Somewhere outside Somerville,
Okay,
Georgia, I think,
yeah.
or Summit, Georgia. Anyway, I never told them that, that I fell asleep. I was
boy.
just so tired. I had an old bike too. And I hadn't been riding that wrong. And I didn't have the proper shorts, so you know what the deal was there.
Yeah.
So you like a lot of athletics?
Yeah, I think so. I wouldn't say I'm any good at any of them, but it's nice to just move. I think
Yeah.
it's a mistake if you stop moving.
Yeah. Have you ever done that bird banding thing they have in Chattanooga?
Bird band.
Bird banding, they have that once a year where they meet and they take those fun yaks and they ride down to this place and you walk like 5 miles and they band these birds with their legs. I forget what it is, but I did that one time. It was pretty neat looking back.
What do they ban the birds for?
Well, they trace where they're going somehow,
Just for
like
fun?
migration.
Okay.
It's a completely, you can't have any. It's really, I can't even think what I'm saying. It's on a preservation.
I've never heard of it, but my parents had a pigeon show up at their property in North Georgia, and it had a little band on its arm.
I bet that might have been it.
We Googled it. It's a racing pigeon. This is what people do. They invest in pigeons and then they send them around the world.
Isn't that something?
Like, imagine having that kind of expendable income where you're just like, off you go, little birdie.
Yeah, and that's how they used to send them, messages through carrier pigeon.
Yeah.
That was a real thing, I reckon.
Yeah, there are some government agencies that should probably re-implement the carrier pigeon. I think it would be more efficient for them.
You ever worry about emails and cryptic messages? And I had this guy texted me earlier today. He said, delete this. And I said, okay, I deleted it. And I thought, well, where is it now? Is it still, somebody's got a copy of it. So it makes you wonder if it's going to get back to, you can trust me and I'll deliver this letter and I'll show it to them and I'll rip it up and I'll never tell a soul.
Yeah.
There may be a business like that sometime because everything else you could be heard or traced or copied or, just to have somebody that you're going to just give a message no matter what.
Yeah.
Everything goes back to, isn't it funny that things go back to the way the pendulum swings the other way? If you can just figure out how to take the past and implement it into the new, you'll have something.
Like,
See, what you're doing, what you got there is what started out as being the wagon trains.
Yeah.
What's the difference? They lived in there.
Yeah, that's true. I think, there are statistics about the construction industry is the only industry of its size that's becoming less efficient over time.
It's the most inefficient business there is, and I'm in it.
It's inexcusable with all of the advancements that we've had.
It is.
But it's just the need to embrace alternative forms of construction, like modular, that are just as nice, if not better.
Well, it's just built over there. That's all it is, just built over there.
Yeah, and the sustainability aspect of it, when you're talking about, job site waste and how much we don't have that problem, if we don't use a piece of zip system on one home, we can use it on the next.
Sure, you got part of a roll.
Yeah.
And it didn't get wet during construction.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of new homes out there with very great materials that are very well built, but they were exposed to a lot of weather during their construction. It's true.
Well, how does people get a hold of you to buy a home?
The best thing to do is go on our website. I guarantee we check that inbox every day. It's just info@WinRiverBuilt, and there's real people on the other side of that. The phone number comes to us too, so it's really, we're a small enough team.
Give them your office phone number.
Well, my work number is 423-605-6843. And if anyone's wanting to talk about building modular or building a tiny home, I'm the one to call.
How far can you deliver?
That also depends on the build category. We have tiny homes on wheels as far as Alaska and Hawaii, so anywhere in the country. And for modular builders typically have a serviceable area because you have to be certified in the state that you're building for. So right now we're certified in Tennessee, but we're going to get certified in Georgia and North Carolina. And basically, if someone approaches us with a project that's out of state, we'll get certified in that state so that we can do that project. But a lot of times, what kills a modular deal is the freight. It's so expensive to move these homes long distances. So it does usually make sense to keep your serviceable area close to home base.
Like regional or something?
Regionally, yeah. So I do not know of another modular builder that's doing what we do at the level at which we do it in the Southeast. So we've got really good opportunity where we're positioned to offer something really nice. There's other builders, just not on the end of the spectrum where we are, if that makes sense.
And a lot of those probably are reciprocating those certifications you get certified in one state, the other state will reciprocate.
I don't know. The other team members probably know.
With contractor's license, you can get, Georgia will reciprocate.
Uh-huh.
So you just have to get financially approved in that state, but you don't have to take the test and all
Yeah.
that stuff.
I don't know. It's worth me getting some more knowledge on that because I know that some of our inspections have been done by a guy in Alabama. So maybe he's certified in like a tri-state area or something. I know that it does, like, building code is so dependent upon climate. So if you're sticking close to one area and you've already gotten certified in Tennessee, it's probably going to be pretty easy to get certified in Georgia because the building codes are similar.
Right.
It gets way different when you're up in like Oregon or Maine.
You hear that rain? Is that rain?
I can't believe it.
Yeah, we needed it, didn't we?
But it rained yesterday.
Your allergies bother you around here?
Yes, not with the rain, but with the pollen. And it didn't used to be that way. I grew up in Georgia and never had a problem. But this year it kicked my butt in like March.
Well, I was about 29 when I couldn't understand what they're talking about, pollen. And one day it hit me.
You found out.
I found out, and it's been off and on ever since. So you've got it.
Yeah. A little yellow sheen across all of our
Yeah.
vehicles.
But this rain will help.
Hopefully. Yeah.
Well, listen, I hope you do well, and I really enjoyed talking to you.
This is great. I enjoy it too. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.